Hey, welcome to the Glenn Gower Podcast, sponsored by Mission Blueprint. Welcome back, everybody. It's so good to have you. I hope you're having just a fantastic week. We've been talking about the 4 marks of Marx. Now, the first one is to destroy the family. The second one, destroy rights to property ownership, right? And the third one is destroy religion. By the way, Dennis, did you have a chance to listen to Katie's interview?
I did.
What'd you think?
It's really good. It's really good. I was bummed, I wasn't involved, but, that's just me being selfish.
We're going to get you involved. I want to bring Katie back in a couple months and see if there's any developments.
I think she'd be great with that. I mean, she's on fire.
She's on fire, yeah, and her community keeps growing. And the reason why I threw Katie out first is because today we're going to talk about how do you destroy a nation. And one of the things that I talk about with Katie is there's so many people caught up in national politics, right?
So many,
right.
Especially today.
Yeah. So I don't have cable. Haven't had cable for years. Now and then I'll get a month or two of cable or get it free from, Sling free for a month or whatever. And so I kind of check out Fox News, CNN, see what they're saying. MSNBC seems to be kind of a lower grade, but maybe they all are. And there's so much focus on, of course, national politics, but we should be focusing on local politics.
That's where it all happens.
It's where it all happens. And so there's so much time focused on national politics. So let's discuss destroying nation today. And what would be the purpose of destroying a nation or destroying nations and nationality? What would be the overall purpose of this? Let's get right into it, because I think the purpose of destroying all the nations in the end has everything to do with the Catholic Church.
Tell me more.
What is the only international major movement that the world has ever seen?
The UN.
Okay. I suppose it's 100 years long, right? When did the UN come into existence?
1949.
Okay.
1945.
So the Catholic Church is about 2,000 years old.
Okay.
All right. So
it was probably the original.
Yeah.
It was the United
The
Nations.
UN, Catholic Church, juxtapose them. They're about the same, right?
Well, I mean,
Christ, Satan. Which way do you want to go here, right?
Well, the Catholic Church got it started, and they just handed the baton off to,
Yeah.
the United Nations is going to take it to the end.
Exactly.
No pun intended.
God bless United Nations. Yes, exactly. God bless United Nations. But I think the point of this whole Marxist movement is to destroy Catholicism and Christianity, because if you destroy Christianity, and not just Catholicism, all Christians, right? But if you destroy Christianity, you can build a one world government. Have you heard of the New World Order?
Yeah.
What the
New World Organization,
Okay.
NWO.
Yeah, the NWO. The first time I saw the New World Order in action was WWE. You see, did you ever watch World Wrestling?
No. I missed that.
It's great entertainment. I just introduced that to Judah a week ago. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't really watch this very often. I mean, once in a great moon, but
as he's sitting here in his mask and cape.
Yeah, exactly. But when I was 16 years old, we used to watch, Hogan and Andre the Giant fight. Do you remember those fights?
I remember Hulk Hogan because he was an icon in TV commercials, and Jake the Snake and the $1 Million Man.
Jake the Snake Roberts, the $1 Million, Ted DiBiase, Ric Flair. Do you remember all those guys? No,
I don't.
I really got into it. I thought it was funny. But so after, this is really interesting. After, what's his name? Hulk Hogan defeated Andre the Giant. He was huge. And then he was beat by the Ultimate Warrior. And then Hulk Hogan, who's been good all this time, started a new wrestling movement called the NWO, the New World Order. Why is this interesting? Well, there could be some connections here with what's really going on today. Now, this is a stretch. All right, Dennis, this is a stretch.
Here comes Stretch Armstrong.
So, who is in charge of the WWE? Do you know what his name is?
I don't.
Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon is a patriot. A lot of people don't know this. I follow him on Twitter. His name is Vincent Kennedy. Have you heard of the name Kennedy before?
Oh, a few times.
So JFK, when he was in the military, there's a movie called PT 109? Judah, 109? If I'm Joe Rogan, Judah is my Jamie. You know how he yells after Jamie?
Oh, yeah.
Judah gets us, ladies and gentlemen, he gets us the information. So he's our fact checker.
And our researcher.
And our researcher. Thanks, Judah, for being here. He just smiles and he's going to punch me later, my 14-year-old boy. Anyway, Vince McMahon, his dad was served with JFK. And if you watch the movie PT-109, the PT ship gets cut in half by a Japanese boat. See, thank you, Judah. By a Japanese boat. And so they have to survive this. And so JFK, this is a true story. A lot of people don't know this about JFK, not JFK Jr., JFK Sr. So JFK Sr., he, I wasn't going to get into any of this at all, but it's so interesting. So JFK Sr., one of his buddies was McMahon. I can't remember his first name. Do you remember his first name? Our fact checker will correct me on this later. But anyway, there's a scene in the boat where they're trying to get to the shore, and he's pulling a guy, JFK now. Okay, of course, he's not president. This is Korea.
Probably Korean conflict if it's Japanese.
Yeah, I think it's Korea. So he's getting his guys to shore to safety, and he's going to try to get them out of the pickle they're in. But he pulls a gentleman with the rope with his teeth, and he's swimming him to shore, and his name was McMahon. Well, McMahon, last name McMahon, had a son, and he named him Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And this is the gentleman who started World Wrestling Federation, the WWE, or the World Wrestling, WWF. I'm not even sure. And anyway, he had a whole group of guys that were working with him, and we think they are patriots. I'll probably cut this out of the whole thing, but it's so interesting. So Vincent McMahon, everything's scripted in the WWE. He had this group called the New World Order, started by Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan turned bad, and it painted the New World Order as bad. But about the same time in our government, this was a little bit after George Bush Sr. gave the presidential address. I don't know what year it was, 1990? I'm totally guessing here, where he talked about a new world order. Now, other presidents have talked about a new world order. Clinton talked about a new world order. George Bush Jr. did. Obama did. I don't know if Biden has talked about a new world order or not. But the NWO, the New World Order, is this whole idea of a one nation. WWE, which I don't think has any real credibility, but maybe they were signaling, maybe not, was signaling that this is bad. We don't want a new world order. Why? Why don't we want all nations under one particular guy? What are they trying to do? I know, ladies and gentlemen, this seems far out. Now we're talking about no longer about wrestling. We're going to shove that to the side, okay? No more wrestling. To reality, though, I only bring up wrestling because it signals. It could be signaling something. By the way, check out Trump and Vince McMahon. They're buddies. And Trump was involved. It's just wild, wild stuff. What's happening in our world today? Some people believe what's happening is this idea of the New World Order is trying to be put forward. We're trying to bring it about. Some people believe that we are literally in the book of Revelations right now. I don't know. I listen to people. I have an open mindset. My mindset's not so open, like Chesterton said, where your brains will fall out, right? We said that before. But I don't know what's going on in the world. So I just want to ask, you want to get in here for a second before I ask you your first question?
No, go for it. This is awesome.
Yeah. So the idea of Marxism, ladies and gentlemen, is to destroy Catholicism and then individual nations so they can create a one world government. If you watch a video by Prince Charles in the last, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, he gave a talk and he was positioning what some people believe is to be the Antichrist. I know this is far out there, but Prince Charles gave a talk where all nations would come under one and there would be one ruler. And this one ruler would have trillions of dollars at his hand where he could distribute the money throughout the world. Well, I think the precursor for all of this is the United Nations. I really do. What is your thought on that?
United Nations is the stepson or the prodigal son of the League of Nations from 1919. That was post World War I, and its task, its goal, its four-member alliance was to create stability across the world peace, and prevent all future wars.
Seems like a good idea.
They did, but they failed epically because they had no military, they had no financing, they didn't have any teeth. And when the opportunity arose to challenge its strength, Germany shredded through it like a paper doll. Mm-hmm. On the heels of that, Roosevelt created the brainchild of the United Nations, but instead of it just being 4 countries, initially they brought in 50. But only 5 countries possess a veto power to any resolution in the UN Council.
Okay, say that again. 5 countries possess veto power?
Veto power.
Do you remember who those are? Which ones?
It is United States, Great Britain, Russia, China, and I believe Japan.
So they are the heavyweights in the UN.
They're the ones that pretty much say which way the wind's going to blow.
Interesting.
That's why, like, what we're seeing happening in the world today with Russia potentially invading Ukraine, you will not see a UN convoy, you'll not see a UN truck, you'll not see UN peacekeepers attend there because the resolution brought before the UN was vetoed by Russia. So therefore, no action can come from the UN because it's been vetoed by Russia.
So 1 out of 5 can veto and that's over.
Right, but there's 193 countries, multiple unrecognized states, and partially recognized states that are part of the UN Council. It's virtually every conquered province, inch of land in the world is represented at the UN.
And so the UN, do they have their own military? And if they do, what are they made up of?
They are not. Each country contributes soldiers, puts them on a tour of duty if you were with the United Nations. So it may be as little as 500 troops. It may be as many as 5,000. But what it is when there's an action, obviously UN's premise is to manage all conflict diplomatically, bring the figureheads of each country or each side of the conflict to the table and negotiate it out. But on a peacekeeping mission or something where they're going to go intervene with like a genocide or what happened with the pandemic globally, they would deploy UN troops for mass inoculation globally. Like they work together.
And they were formed what year? Do you remember the year?
1945. Their resolution was formed early in January before Roosevelt died. But in like June 26, 1945, Harry S. Truman carried that mantle on for it to be signed and for the U.S. to be part of the United Nations.
Okay. I do think that's the first glimpse of the New World Order. If you establish the United Nations and then you bring about a situation where you need fuller control. Some people might believe that what happened in 2020 with the shot thing, that gave reason to create a one world government and that they're trying to put it into effect even this year in 2022.
Well, you're already seeing the emergence of the idea or the concept of a one world currency in the form of crypto, because cryptocurrency will defy all borders. It's transmissible via electronic. There is no paper to transmit. There isn't a bank account to quote unquote hold it in. And if you pay attention to anything that your children do electronically, whether it's playing a game on their iPhone or iPad, or if it's on an Xbox, what they buy with cash is credits. They buy digital credits. they're already being indoctrinated to the concept of using a digital currency that has no monetary value in the real world as we would understand it, and maybe as we grew with cash is king or gold carries it all. Our entire next generation of young people are being raised with, if you do this, we'll give you tokens, and those tokens you can buy virtual food, you can buy virtual sunglasses. Kind of what the context and the premise of the metaverse is, but the metaverse has been out there for 15 years.
What's that? What's the metaverse?
The metaverse is the virtual reality. It's what Facebook has rebranded itself now to be virtual reality, and it's a way of contorting, distorting. Hollywood's played off this concept, everything from Surrogates, the movie where you'll live in your little box, your little room, but you'll have your character that will go out into the real world and perform a task or whatever that character may do. There won't be an actual exchange of goods. It'll just all happen virtually.
Right. So the euro. Let's get to the euro for just a second here. The euro was created, I don't know when. I was in Europe in '96. They didn't have the euro yet. So that was in the last 10 or 15 years, right?
I would say the European Union formed late 90s, early 2000s when it really took off, because I don't think the European Union was consolidated into its function until after 9/11.
Okay. So when I heard about the euro, my first thought was, is this a step towards a one government, a one world government? And how is the euro doing right now? Do you know?
As far as a currency?
Right.
Dollar to euro, the exchange rate is higher, so you get more euros than. How's that work? So if you get $1, it's worth 1.3 euros or 1.23 euros. I don't know over a trend line where it's going. Let's have our fact checker look, and we'll come back to that in 30 seconds.
We'll have Judah do that for us. Are all the countries that started with euro, do they still use euro, or did any country back out?
Great Britain backed out.
They did.
They're back on the pound.
Wow.
There's another country that had economic failure just a few years ago, down by Egypt.
Greece?
I don't know if it was Greece, but one of them, their whole economic system failed, and so they had the stagnation, massive inflation, and their base currency in their country just. So what's cool about it is some countries held on to their base currency. So if you're in Germany, you could still use a mark. But if you're going to travel the European Union, you would use EUs, because that would be a global currency. Or think of the United States. If South Dakota printed its own coin, but you're going to go over to Minnesota and buy groceries, you would use the U.S. dollar in Minnesota. But if you're going to buy goods and services in South Dakota, you'd use your own South Dakota currency.
It's convenient.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple countries backed out of the EU. I didn't know that. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about destroying a nation. And the end in mind, I believe, is the New World Order. One government, one ruler. All money is funneled to the one ruler. He can dispense it how he or she wants to. We may be a bit of a slave right now when it comes to our tax code, where our monies go. We would really be a slave. I don't see us having any rights. Do you see the same thing, or what is the biggest impediment to a New World Order?
Well, a New World Order is going to and I like looking at it just because of my political background, is that the United Nations has a really broad goal. And what it is it's getting the individual to the market of the world. Global economy, global trade, global interaction. I can pull up a YouTube video today and I can watch a professor talk in India on whatever is happening in the Indian markets. I can talk to someone on video chat on someone in South Africa and talk about what's going on in the South African nation. So it allows this really broad ability to learn, educate, trade, do services. I've never thought about it in the context of it trying to trump or roll over Christianity or replace Christianity or Muslim faith or anything like that, because I just never thought of it in that context. So this is a very fun conversation for me because it's making me think about something in a different way. I just have always liked how the United Nations was, okay, we got to really do something about clean water for across the world. We've got to do something about food and hunger for poverty and starvation worldwide. You know, I I grew up with the mother that had the, hey, you better eat everything off your plate because there's somebody in Africa who's starving today.
Why do they always use Africa?
I don't know.
Was there a commercial? What about that Indian? You remember the Indian in the canoe and he was rowing it, or was he in the canoe but he was crying because of what we're doing to, remember that?
Oh, yeah.
That was a long time ago.
And the one I always was the UNICEF commercials with the little Ethiopian baby that had the great big bloated belly because he's full of parasites and his arms are the biggest spaghetti noodles.
And we don't have any people like that in America.
No kids ever go hungry here.
No.
So, but this is such a fun and interesting conversation because, like you said, from a political standpoint, the United Nations, I think, has a really high ideology that would benefit the world. I just never thought of it being evil.
Yeah, I don't know if it is, but I have this inkling. I don't like government. I don't like big government. There is a purpose for government. What is the purpose? You've been in politics for a while. You were in D.C. for how many years were you in D.C.?
Just a year and a half.
What is the overall purpose of government? I am really putting you on the spot here.
No. So if you go back to civics class, government's always been this instrument of, it's supposed to serve people. You know, it's supposed to be there to serve people. But government doesn't do that, especially when you get in the nation's capital where government feeds government, feeds government, feeds government. And oh, by the way, there's some private K Street legal minds that feed government policy. And what I've learned is that government's about wealth redistribution, trying to level the playing field, taking those who don't have and giving them something so they do have. But one of the things I disagree with in how Washington manages it is they completely forgo the psychological damage that's done when you give someone something. Nobody values anything that's free. Nobody values anything that's just given to them. And most people are ashamed to have a handout, whether they'll admit it or not.
What percentage of Americans before Trump came into office were on some form of government support? Do you know?
Oh, I have no idea.
Over 50%.
That work in government.
No. Over 50% of all Americans were getting some sort of handout from the government.
Oh, and I totally believe that.
Is that not socialism?
That is, but
I thought we were a capitalistic country.
Well, that's the goods and services, but that's also why we call it a United States democracy now instead of a United States republic.
Would you remind our viewers the difference?
Of course. So a republic is a governing system that is based on laws and traditions. Think of the judiciary system, the third part of the triangle. We have the congressional, the judiciary, and the executive branches. And Congress is supposed to pass laws. President's either supposed to veto them or to sign them, and then they're supposed to go over to the judiciary, and the judiciary decides if they are in construct or in support of the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, we call that checks and balances.
Checks and balances. But what has happened and what you've seen, everything from Roe v. Wade to gender equality to some of the major court decisions over the last 30, 40 years is the court is more making decisions based on how society is functioning or feeling in its present state. And our founding fathers never wanted our country to be so emotional and be so whimsical on the temperament of today, because that isn't how legacies are built. It isn't how generational systems are formed. they have to be rooted and based in very common, very basic, very clear rules. And democracy is about ruling of the societal majority, not the rule of law.
And that is the big difference. So polling, we've had polling for a long time. If the majority of Americans believe you should smoke pot, so the underlying rule then in democracy is legalize pot because the majority says so, correct?
Correct.
But what about the minority? Isn't it true that in a constitutional republic, which the United States, I believe, was built on, actually protects the rights of minorities? Is that correct?
That's the way it's supposed to be, because
Okay.
the whole spectrum of government is supposed to govern broadly so that you can interpret it as narrowly as you want. And what's happened, unfortunately, is now we legislate very narrowly. So we eliminate all this gray area of freedom of choice, freedom of to do what you want to do, to serve who you want to serve, to produce what you want to produce. And unfortunately, the joke now, and it's a sad joke, is that laws are made for the 4% of people that can't follow them. And really, it's laws are made for 96%, so they'll follow the 4.
Interesting. I had not heard that before. Interesting. So the deterioration of a nation is the end in mind. I just want to go back in time just a little bit.
Go for it.
Did you go to public school?
I did.
Where'd you
Several
grow
of
up?
them. Southwest Minnesota, little tiny town called Verdi.
Verdi, what year did you enter kindergarten?
I would have entered kindergarten on or around the fall of 1983.
1983. So tell me, when you went to kindergarten, do you remember saying the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember saying a prayer?
No, we didn't pray.
Do you remember singing a national, how do I call this? A patriotic song?
All the time.
Okay.
My country, 'tis a
Ladies and gentlemen,
sweet
Mr.
land of-
Dennis, Dr. Dennis Willard. Yeah. So I entered kindergarten fall of 1975.
Jeez, I wasn't even born.
I'm so old.
He is, but man, is he good looking.
So we started, it's true, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, anyway. Good looking. Anyway, we would say a prayer.
Did you go to Catholic school or public
no,
school?
public school.
Okay.
I did go to Catholic school after kindergarten, but I started in the public school. We would, and this is probably not in the right order. My classmates can correct me on this, but I remember saying a prayer. I remember the Pledge of Allegiance and singing some patriotic song. I think it was almost the same song every day. Now, I might have that wrong. I don't think so. But I remember growing up in the 1970s and in the 1980s, this country was pretty patriotic. Proud to be an American. And I remember I joined the military in 1988. I think it was slowly slipping away, but we were still somewhat patriotic. And then we got in the Gulf War, and we had that song by I'm proud to be an American. You know that song?
That's not Rob Stewart, is it?
Who's Rob Stewart? Rod Stewart. You mean?
Yeah.
Rod.
Yeah, Rod Stewart.
Wake up, Maggie. I think I got something to say to you. Oh, I
Mr. Glenn
by the way,
Gower.
I'm going to cut that up, but I love Rod Stewart. He was one of my favorites growing up.
Okay.
Oh, he could sing, and he had great hooks. But the country was becoming less and less patriotic over time. I remember when the Clintons got in the office, you just saw this incremental moving away from a patriotic, proud to be an American. And even, especially when Obama came into office, I think George Bush Jr. had a lot to do with it as well. But when Obama came, it just seemed to digress. So I'm curious, you were in D.C. What year did you go to D.C. to work?
2000.
Okay, so you went to D.C. Have you witnessed the deterioration of our country? And if so far, did you notice anything in D.C. where you would say to yourself, I don't think this is patriotic, or I don't think our country should be I'm not sure how to ask this question. Go ahead.
I think I get the tone and the culture or the tone of the question you're trying to ask. And to be very frank, I had visited Washington, D.C. 2 times in my youth, mid-teenage years, for the National Leadership Conference and for a Citizenship Washington focus trip. And I got exposed to all the patriotic things: Arlington National Cemetery, changing of the guard, National Holocaust Museum, Air and Space Smithsonian, Natural History Museum, go to the U.S. Capitol, see the rotunda, get a peek in at the House of Representatives, peek in on the gallery at the U.S. Senate. And as a side note for our listeners, as I just will share with you, I'm headed to Washington, D.C. next month for some lobbying and some tourism stuff. And I just found out, because I want to show my son the House of Representatives, because I used to walk down on the floor there.
No kidding.
It has been closed since January 6th. No visitors, no one can attend, you can't even go in the gallery and observe the House debate.
Anyway, you can get in though.
No,
Can't pull any strings.
I'm working on it. I'm working it.
Come on, John Thune.
Oh, well, John won't be able to do it. I mean, it'll be Dusty Johnson, and if Dusty Johnson can't get me in, I've got 3 other friends that still work on the congressional side, so I'm hoping. But even some staffers can't get on there.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
That makes sense, I
Pelosi
guess.
has it closed. So, but I digress. What I saw and what I observed working in Washington as a staffer is not what they teach you in social studies.
How so?
The way the politics is done, the backdoor deals, the back hallway conversations is really where politics is done. It's not debate as we see it on CNN and C-SPAN is grandstanding. They're spectating for their donors. They're spectating for their constituents back in the state. I don't mean to call out Dusty Johnson or anyone else in particular, but right now there's legislation going through Congress about meat packers. And it's been a really heavy mantle for a lot of Midwestern or ranchy producing folks, representatives, to hang their hat on, like, hey, we're going to investigate the cost of meats because this seems ridiculous. And Dusty Johnson got on his call a couple weeks ago and was like, yeah, I introduced legislation and I'm back in this legislation. And you'll go in, like, nobody does the homework to look at who authored this bill. Well, he didn't write it. Some research analyst on K Street wrote it up, who is put the language together that he then introduced as a joint resolution, and he got co-signers for. Like, he didn't sit down and write this thing, and that's what people don't understand. Is
this typical?
Oh yeah, this is the way that
Right.
this is the way. So we talked about the semantics and what polls well. These resolutions and the laws that get brought up are written by think tanks and research groups and the Brookings Institute out in DC, out in California, out in New York, with brilliant minds, with brilliant legal minds. And then they're given to these congressmen, congresswomen to introduce as legislation. And that's it. Then they go to the floor and we debate our points, and then they get sent over, signed over. Like the CARES Act was a little over, was it 8,000 pages or 5,000 pages?
Huge.
Yeah. And they had 38 hours to read the whole thing and then to vote on it. Same thing with Obamacare. That was over 5,000 pages. They had 12 hours to read through all of the pages and then vote on it as a representative of the U.S. House of Representatives.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, you can read 8,000 pages in 12 hours, can't you? What is going on?
I can't.
Okay, so is this the norm? Is this how it was in the beginning? Since
No, we didn't make... I think Governor Noem has a really neat quote out there about this, that her goal as a governor is not to have a whole bunch of new laws every legislative session. It isn't about doing more governing. It's about clarifying the questions and letting the judiciary side of the government clarify those questions. And when there's a clear gap or a very undefined space, that's where legislature steps in, answers those questions. But we don't govern that way. And the world as a whole can't govern that way because it can't govern broadly because there's too many nations, there's too many cooks in the kitchen, if you will. So if they're going to try to create a one world government and to create unity of, hey, we're going to have a world policy on what we can do, it has to be created from a very high level, and it has to be a very narrow focus. I mean, you look at the UN's doctrine, they have 17 points that they're focusing on now between 2015 to 2030. And everything from poverty and hunger and world health, and it has to have a narrow focus because it can't govern. But who knows what the next brainchild of it will be, what the next offspring is.
Let me ask you another question. I wanted to briefly touch on the idea of separation of church and state. Why? Because this could be another way to destroy a nation, get the religious-minded people, or at least that mentality away from government. So
where does it say there should be a separation in state?
That's what I want to get to. So we've been hearing for many years that our personal religious beliefs don't affect how we legislate, right? Or how I'm going to vote. I think JFK might have started this when he was running for office. What are your thoughts about this separation of church and state? Does it really say that in the Constitution, or is this a ploy to get rid of our Christian morality?
I'm going to flip this one back on you. Does it say in our U.S. Constitution that we should have a separation of state?
I'm not an expert in civics. I have not seen it anywhere. I thought it was an opinion.
But you've read the Constitution a couple times, right?
Well, once maybe.
Okay. Bill of Rights, Constitution?
To be quite honest,
Okay.
probably one time in my life, and it was recent because I realized I really haven't read this. Well, I read it in high school when I was a sophomore, but Barb Shealy was sitting next to me in that class, and I was paying more attention to Barb. It's true.
I understand.
Yeah. So I don't think it says it anywhere. Does our Constitution, is there a provision for separation of church and state?
There is no provision. There's no provision that says we're supposed to separate church and state. It is an opinion of the court that religion shouldn't bear influence or impact into how one person governs or how a government entity should operate, because you shouldn't have only Christianity representing the great melting pot of the United States. There's Hinduism, there's Buddhism, there's Islam. So Judaism. I mean, you can't create a law that limits one of the very founding principles in our Declaration of Independence of the ability to practice whatever religion you want. You'd be cutting your nose off, spite your face. So there is no clear provision anywhere in the U.S. Constitution, but there's a popular held legal position that you should separate that.
It's a little bit like using the word democracy.
But that's where it comes down to local school boards make that decision of, hey, yes, we want to pray before our school board meetings. Yes, we want to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Yes, we want our students to do these things. Brookings School District does Pledge of Allegiance before each of their board meetings. And there is a ancillary school in Brookings where if you don't believe or want to say the Pledge of Allegiance, you can go to that school and you don't have to. It's in their school day is held in the Children's Museum upstairs.
Interesting.
Yep.
So we got to wrap up here.
No.
So give me your final thoughts. We've been talking about destroying a nation, and we talked a little bit about deteriorating the United States. We're not as patriotic. The development of church, separation of church and state, although it doesn't say it, but this idea has been promulgated by our leadership, and most Americans believe that there is a separation of church and state. We have the development of the United Nations, which came from the League of Nations, into this idea of a new world order. So you've been in politics for a long time. You've been to DC a couple times. You saw legislation happen. You're a Christian as well. Christians believe that at some point there will be an antichrist where the world will follow. So, do you see this as a merger between Christianity? Do you see the New World Order as a merger between the one world government and the Christian view of an antichrist? And do you see that actually culminating in today's world?
All right, to be really on the spot about that, I would say from what I've seen, we're not even close. Could it be the footsteps headed that way? For sure. But nowhere in the Bible does it say that the U.S. is part of the end times. The idea of nations is going to have to evaporate and disappear because there won't be individual flags at the time of the revelation, as I understand it. And so the creation of a one world system, one world government, yeah, I mean, you put one person in charge of so many people, especially if you give them supreme authority with no checks or balances as we have here in the United States. I mean, that's in kin with a dictatorship. And we see what Kim Jong-un does with that in North Korea. We see what happens in the CCP with having a singular leadership who doesn't have checks or balances to the people it serves. It certainly could. I think we're a long way away from getting to that point. But I thought we were years away from starting marriages over Zoom and starting relationships off the internet too.
The world is speeding up really fast.
It seems exponential.
I mean, honestly, did you think that our homosexual community would actually have a legal certificate of marriage in your lifetime?
No.
Did you think there would be the support of this transgender movement in your lifetime?
No. Back on the legal side of marriage, I guess I could see that happening because that's another instrument of government, and that just benefits lawyers because now when the relationship doesn't work out, it's another revenue source. It's another marriage to dissolve. It's another set of estates that you have to unwind, and that's just money to them. Like, that's just revenue. So why not?
I was listening to Ralph Martin, and this is my takeaway. Ralph Martin was talking about, are we in the end times? Now, let me just define that. Yes, we are in the end times. The end times officially began on the day of Pentecost. So we are in the last times, okay? So Jesus will be coming back at some point. That's called the Parousia. But the question is, are we in this moment prior to Jesus coming back where there's a development of a new world order, there's a development of an antichrist, and are we living in these times? And he was saying, well, in Thessalonians, St. Paul talks about this, and St. Paul says that the first thing that has to happen is mass apostasy. So, ladies and gentlemen, apostasy is a full rejection of your Christian faith. Are we seeing right now in the world a mass apostasy? And I think the answer to that question is definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, look at the amount of churchgoers in America. It keeps slipping. The numbers were 50%. Oh, how many, 20, 30 years ago, 50% of Americans went to church, to 25%. Europe, when I was in Europe in 96, it was 5% of Europeans went to Mass on Sunday. And I believe that stat because for 4 months, we traveled Europe, on the weekends, and we'd go to Catholic churches all over Europe, and we were the majority.
They packed.
Yes, it was crazy. There was almost nobody there. So America is pretty much gone. Canada, Mexico, Europe is pretty much gone as far as Christianity. Asia is pretty much gone. The only bright light that we see right now in the world is Africa.
Now, on that matter, which Catholic church do you attend?
I attend the Catholic Church in Arlington.
And are you a member there?
Yes.
Okay. So I found it really interesting in our church, which is pretty sizable church. We only have 53 families that are members. We have lots of people that come.
How many families come?
We have lots of families that come, but only 53 have made the commitment to be members.
That's interesting.
They haven't professed that they're all in.
So yeah.
So think about.
Why do you think that is?
I think we've made it okay to not be committed. From marriage to church to the people that we call friends, I'll be committed as long as it's convenient. I'm in as long as it's convenient. As soon as it's hard, I'm out. I don't want to be part of it.
Yeah, there's no sacrifice today. There's no. I mean, how many people fast on a regular basis? How many people do you know?
I'm fasting right now.
Okay, you're doing Exodus 90.
Nope, this is
Just fasting right now.
Other than Ben from our church, Ben, thank you. He fasted for 2 weeks and he challenged me to do the same.
Good for you. How many people do you know? Of all the people that you know, how many people are fasting right this moment?
Oh, very few. Very few.
Of all the people you know, how many people practice? Again, this is a subjective. No, this is objective, but some of it's subjective because you have to use your cognitive powers and speculate a bit.
Reason.
How many people go to Mass or church service on Sunday, but continue developing their Christianity throughout the week?
Next to none. There's
Right.
168 hours a week, and most people can't give it 2 hours.
I read stats on this. The average American that calls himself a Christian goes and participates 60 minutes a week on average. 60 minutes a week.
Out of 168 hours.
Yeah, that's
1 hour.
0.6% of your time is in worshiping God. Ladies and gentlemen, that should be the other way around. It should be all the time, right? Every hour. St. Paul says, pray constantly and practice your Christianity. So there is this global apostasy that's happening right before our eyes. And we saw this even in the 90s. People are still going to Mass, but they fell in love with the world so much. And media has a huge part to play in this because you don't...
Your false idols.
Yeah, how many times have you seen people who have almost no money, but they have Dish Network? Now, I don't know if it's on in the house.
Hey, buy it on credit.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. And the main problem here, and this is my final takeaway, is this. What are you laughing at?
Because this is the takeaway of the takeaway of the takeaway.
Yeah, this is it. The main takeaway and the problem is this. Christians have embraced the world and not Christ. They've absolutely rejected him. And so I think we're in the beginning of this final era, moving into a different era. I still believe Jesus is coming back in my lifetime.
Okay.
And I hope I'm wrong. I hope we humans, through his Holy Spirit, can work it out.
But just live in a way that it's not something to fear.
I saw a gentleman who calls himself a prophet say the reason why Christ hasn't come back yet is because we haven't asked him. Enough people haven't begged him to come back. That's an interesting take.
But if you go back to the Old Testament, every time in the book of Samuel, every time the Israelites fall to the Philistines, it finally comes down to Samson demonstrating his conviction. It comes down to Saul being the prophet and saying, no, turn away, turn away, turn away. And how many years did he prophesy before the Israelites said, okay, you're right, these idols are bad. And as soon as they turned it and pulling the Ark of the Covenant out of its sacred place and letting the Philistines capture it, and it brings plagues upon their nation, like, God's got a crazy way of working.
Your final thoughts.
You know what? Do your own research, look into these things, and if you have any curiosities about how the Marx system destroys nations, just do a research of your own community of laws that have been passed in the last year or two that limit and constrict you versus ones that create more freedom and more opportunity for prosperity. And just do your own research. and leave it in the comments below, and share with your friends to have a dialogue with your neighbor. Have them over for a glass of wine. Bring them over for a fresh slice of apple pie, and talk about these things amongst your neighbors, because that's the only way we're going to make a difference in this world is we talk about it. And you don't take the television's word for it. We talk it over at the kitchen table.
That's a great final comment. I never thought I'd hear a politician in America push socialism, but it's been happening in the last few years. Yeah, I think Marxism has been quite successful in our world today. And you look at places like the former USSR, you look at China, Venezuela, and you look at those communities and watch what has happened. Anyone with a fair mind would say, this is ridiculous. But here we are. Socialism continues to be pushed on our throats, and it is working. Hey, thanks for listening to the Glenn Gower podcast. You can find us on Apple, Google, YouTube, and Rumble channels. May God strengthen the bars of your gate.